Good evening, Product Earth. How are we? That's better. Welcome to the Fireside Chats. We are very lucky to have Douglas Gordan, the CEO of Silo Wellness, with us today. Douglas has been doing some fantastic work over in Jamaica, working with indigenous tribes, looking at plant-based medicines. So we're going to understand a little bit about the work that he's been up to. This panel is entitled Back to Our Roots, What Can We Learn from Indigenous Tribes? And hopefully Douglas is going to give us a little bit of an insight into that in the work that he has been doing. So Douglas, please, let us know a little bit about Silo Wellness and what you do.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I feel especially welcome when I see a young man with a Liverpool Football Club cap on. No, Silo Wellness is a global psychedelics and wellness company. We operate in 3 key verticals. Those are cultivation, which we do in Jamaica, of psilocybin mushrooms. We have a line of functional mushrooms, which we partnered with the Marley family, that we call Marley One. And we also host psychedelic retreats in Jamaica. And we also do psychedelic retreats in Oregon. A big part of our company, and most of you are probably familiar with the interest that's come together for psychedelics in general, and what they can do for healing, and what they can do for personal development, what they can do for mental health. But one of the things that we've focused on is the ability to help people today. And I think it's great that there's so much scientific and clinical work that's being conducted around psychedelics. But what sometimes gets missed in that is the fact that there are thousands and thousands of years of use of psychedelics from the indigenous communities. And we have the opportunity now to learn from that use and allow people to get the help that they need today. And that's been very, very big for us at Silo. And it's really driven a lot of the different initiatives and the decisions we've made around either product development or markets we attempt to service or we operate in, because that's very key to us. So that's a little bit about us. We're headquartered in Toronto. We have operations in Montego Bay, Jamaica, and in Oregon.
Hi. So my kind of indigenous wisdom was mainly gathered from Colombia. I spent a couple of weeks out in Colombia on the most amazing medicine retreat, but it didn't consist of taking psychedelics, even though I did do a ayahuasca spell for a couple of years. It was all around the sacredness of the fire, actually, ironically, as we sit around the fire, and the sacredness of intention and the circle and the community. And I learned so much from them. And one of the key things that I took away was these indigenous cultures, these indigenous wisdom keepers. They've been doing that. They've been keeping the knowledge, the wisdom, the songs, the herbal, not only the herbal recipes, but also the herbal stories and the folk tales that go along with those, and the instruments. And it's not just one thing, it's the many aspects of culture that weave into this kind of amalgamation of magic that appears from this engagement with nature, whether it's psychedelics or whether it is the fire and the earth and the air and the water. And I know there's a lot of hot topics at the moment of how these multinational, multi-billion-pound industries can work in a respectful way with these indigenous cultures, and the money gets refiltered into the community rather than being filtered out. I know Jamaica is one of the most hot topics for this in particular, and how is it like on the ground and in real life? How is that being tackled, and what's the real life kind of how a big business is implementing like on the ground grassroots projects?
Well, that's always the challenge. What we saw with cannabis in Jamaica is, I always make the metaphor of almost a similarity between having a store on Fifth Avenue and having a footprint in Jamaica in the cannabis space. It's never going to make you money, but it's your pathway to sort of planting your flag and showing the world that you're important, you're significant, etc. What's really unfortunate is so many of these companies came into Jamaica, they made all these big announcements around Jamaica, they saw the increases in their stock prices, that was enough, they packed up shop and they went back. And so you have no real lasting impact to Jamaica. You have some folks that got temporary engagement, some consulting fees, some lawyers made some money. Well, lawyers always make money, but anyway, besides that, there was nothing lasting. And so what we've tried to do as a company, and I don't take a position to say this is what the industry should do. I run a company, and I have stakeholders in my company, and I convince them the best I can of what I think is the right thing. But what we have done is, we've tried to really look at transferring knowledge as distinct from just using talent locally. And so, our cultivation has been folks who have been doing this in the Western United States for many, many years, coming in and training people in Jamaica so that they can go back. And then our cultivation now is executed by Jamaicans in Jamaica. And at the end of the day, what do I look at from that perspective is the day it makes business sense for Silo to extract itself from Jamaica, have we transferred the knowledge and the skill set so that the folks who have supported us can go on in the industry wherever they work with that same skill set. So we look at that. And then the other thing to talk to you about indigenous is, again, we had initially some folks who were going to have great experience with retreats and psychedelic experiences and so forth. But we were able to look for those folks in Jamaica who know about psychedelic retreats. And we're very fortunate to, be able to engage a very respected Rastafarian who's had lots and lots of years of hosting retreats at his Rastafari indigenous village. And so he's become an integral part of how we put our retreats together. And we're very proud of that, because at the end of the day, what we've said is, the medicine does its work, right? But it's very important that the guide that takes you on that process and helps you through it knows exactly what they're doing. It doesn't matter about being, we're in Jamaica, let's get a Jamaican, or we're in Colombia, let's get a Colombian. Like that's not the first priority. You have to have someone who knows what they're doing, that can really take you on a worthwhile experience that's really allows you to have the full benefit of the medicine, right? So we've had that now with a Rastafarian leader, and we're very proud of it. We were able to go on and, I think our company, I'm very proud of the fact that we could turn around and say, look, let's have a head of indigenous affairs. Let's get someone and let's make this a statement within the industry that indigenous is a key part of what we do. And we've done that. So we have a head of indigenous affairs. And what that's allowed us to do through his network is work with other indigenous communities and have them even come into Jamaica to lead specific retreats, and also offers us a pathway to having retreats in those different countries. So we've literally just had someone in Jamaica for a month and a half from Mexico, leading retreats as well as teaching our team about the indigenous practices to help enhance that whole knowledge base and that whole experience. So it's very, very important to us. But as I said, as an industry, we look and from a very specific perspective, how can we really play a role in transferring this knowledge? The psychedelics industry has so much room to grow. It has so much future pathway. And so whatever we can do now that has longer term impact, we're very much committed to. Sorry.
We ended up fighting over the mic last night as well, Douglas. I got kicked off a couple of times for talking too much. We were meant to be joined by Dimitri Freeman tonight, but Dimitri hasn't turned up. I don't know what he's up to. But Dimitri is one of the original, his great-great-grandfather was one of the original free men from Jamaica. And this is something that Dimitri is very proud of. And we've been doing a lot of work over the last year, working with indigenous tribes, not in Jamaica, but actually in North America, particularly with the Sioux Nation and the Choctaw Nation. And I've never met these people, but we've managed to communicate because of technology, because of Zoom and everything like that. So we've built up great relationships with some of these tribes, particularly the Rosebud tribe. And what has become very apparent is the suffering that they've had since, they look at reservations and they see the reservations more as prisoners of war camps rather than somewhere to live. It's horrific. And what we're starting to realise especially with plant-based medicine, is that not only is this good for people's health and they can tackle their addiction and poverty within their tribes, but also create economies that will give them products to sell and trade with. In particular, they have, they've had some wild hemp on their reservation for the last couple of 100 years from when the French last invaded. So it's been there for a long time. So because that hemp has been grown on their land for such a long time, they have the chance to have a land race. And then by having that seed as a land race, they can then trade with the outside world. So, and I think I'm speaking on behalf of Dimitri here, but I think as we grow as an industry and as we develop and these companies are created, you know, these companies should really support from the grassroots up. And you were saying before that you've had some bigger companies come to Jamaica, but no one's really profited from it and left. And, you know, and then companies like yourself can actually do good and work with indigenous tribes. And is it something that we've kind of experienced here in the UK with major corporations from Canada and the US coming over here, it not moving quick enough for them? They've left the country, All right, there's a few of them coming back in. But what it's allowed is for that grassroots industry to start coming up. And here we have, you know, a UK grassroots industry that is, you stand in the expo like earlier on, and there's 1,000,001 brands. We've got a fantastic industry, and this is the grassroots. So I think what's important is that as these companies develop, is to really bring those indigenous tribes that have suffered for all of those years and support them and allow them to benefit from these medicines that they have been using for thousands of years.
Well, I mean, for sure. But I think, you know, the other thing that's important is, you know, business is business. So we all have to recognize that and not sort of swim upstream against it. And it's very important that you're able to take some of these communities and if you will, mentor them in some sort of way to say, look, this is your immediate value add, right? You can now use your indigenous history, culture to lead on a retreat or guide. But what happens after that? Because that's only a very small, specific part of the supply chain. What are you going to do beyond that? And that's where some of the mentorship comes in. But it's also, you know, you have to have a receptive audience. And in some instances, some of these communities have been so hurt that they're very sort of hesitant to take on board any of that guidance. They want to do it their way. And that's been a natural challenge. But like I said, I mean, I've been doing stuff in cannabis from before, and some of the Rastafarian community, I didn't even know a bald head could be a black guy. You know what I mean? That was educational to me, because they're like, no, you're like a bald head. I'm like, what do you mean? I'm black. And they're like, no, a bald head doesn't have anything to do with color. It has to do with, you know, your background, your perspective. And so you don't come into this with a religious Rastafarian type of perspective, and so therefore you're from the outside world. So it took a while for them even to understand with my conference that my platform was to sort of educate and propagate the cannabis industry in Jamaica. And then I got accepted. But if it didn't take 4 to 5 years for some of those people to come around, what could we have accomplished in the meantime? So I'm saying it goes both ways, 100%. There is a responsibility that we as different corporate entities have to communities, but there also has to be the receptivity there. And I think the role that's important to play to support the industry is when we have a sort of grassroots perspective or understanding or sensibility, that we're able to share that knowledge both ways. Because so much can be done for these communities. You have niche products, niche brands that they can absolutely pursue, but they also have to be produced in the right way. You know, just because your grandmother did it in her kitchen and you've been taking it for years, that's not commercially viable. You know, it's not safe, it's not reliable, it's not, you know, there's a lot of different things that it's not. So if we can help to educate, and then I think there's a massive, massive opportunity out there, not just for psychedelics. Well, psychedelics are gonna be a different kettle of fish, let's be honest, because they're so powerful that they can't be produced willy-nilly. But certainly looking for other avenues for prosperity and commercial participation, I think is very important for those grassroots communities.
Thank you. Just bringing it back from a patient perspective, if I was a patient who wanted to come onto one of your retreats, what would the kind of run through, what would the experience be from start to end? What would that look like?
Sure. So in Oregon, where we have ketamine-assisted retreats, that's, you know, it has to be conducted under the auspices of a doctor, and therefore it's a lot more medically oriented. You know, you have to have, you know, a problem, a challenge that has to be treated, if you will, right? In Jamaica, we tend to position them a little bit more for individuals who are looking to have a broader, more expansive experience in life. So it's not so much problem remedy oriented as much as it is folks looking for an expanded experience in life. And so what we have, there's a pre-screening process we go through, because you have contraindications you have to be mindful of that are they're just not appropriate in that sort of group setting with the resources that we have. So those are instances where, some folks come in and they have indications that suggest that that's not the right pathway for them. And so we don't necessarily approve them for that. We'll direct them another way to treat them. But for the vast majority, they go through the pre-screening process. Then we have an onboarding with them. So we explain to them what the experience is going to be like, what they can expect. That's both through an online Zoom call with our retreat leader. And then again, in that conversation, if he sees any indications, then we'll have them speak to one of our psychotherapists to get a better sense of if they're ready for it. But once we move past that, when they get to Jamaica, we really try to just give them a really wonderful, memorable experience. Everything from the food, the menu that's created for them, to how they're received at the airport, and the whole 9 yards. Like, we really go out, but it's very much about mind, body, and soul. So you have, as I said, meditation, you have yoga, you have your different experiences, and then there's a lot of one-on-ones with our retreat leader. So we engage, like, what are your intentions for your retreat? What are you trying to get out of this experience? And then as you've had your first, session with the medicine, the next day he'll...
What medicine is it? Psilocybin?
So in Jamaica, we do predominantly psilocybin. And then we've just had our first 5-MeO DMT retreats. We will add additional psychedelics as we get the specific expertise that we're comfortable is able to execute.
Is it mushroom derived, or is it a synthetic?
Psilocybin is mushroom derived. Yeah.
It's not a synthetic psilocybin.
No, it's not. And we cultivate the mushrooms in Jamaica, so we have various species that we administer with.
Where'd you sign me up? I think maybe we do a competition on Products Earth Facebook to maybe win a trip over to Jamaica.
You can't enter your own.
Yeah, of course I can. Of course I can. Douglas, I'm really keen to understand more about the relationship between you and the Marley family, because growing up through my youth, Bob Marley has been, a huge Bob Marley fan, and I've been to Jamaica. I went to his house. That's about the close. Did you go to his house? Did you? Yeah. How did that come about? It's such a fantastic idea. I've seen all of the content behind it, seen his wife's story in the background. What's your relation? How did that come about? What's your relationship there?
Sure. So one of the early lessons going back to cannabis again was, when we went to the market, people heard THC, they heard cannabis, they heard weed, they heard ganja. There's all these different names. Okay. Then they learned about CBD, then they learned about THC, and then CBD was the good one and THC was the bad one. There's all these different definitions and boxes. And we looked at psychedelics and we said, okay, how are we going to educate people about psychedelics in a way that they'll be sort of, lower that threshold, that risk factor, that concern, sort of work on the stigmas that are out there. And we felt very strongly that we needed a brand that would communicate to people a degree of trust, curiosity, authenticity with our messaging. And when we looked at all of that, we felt that, there was nothing stronger than the Marley name, and we, through a very fortuitous introduction, we had a chance to meet with them. And what was this whole process, which you'll find if you're into mushrooms and psychedelics and so forth, there's, the synchronicities are very, very powerful when you sort of, just get yourself on that plane. And here we are thinking, okay, from a commercial perspective, this is the best path to be able to educate the most people about something they think they know about, but they're invariably scared of, right? At the same time, the Marleys are looking for other ways, newer ways to sort of, use their brand to help educate and do good in the world. And they have a history and an understanding of mushrooms. So, when we came together, it was literally very, hand in glove type of moment. And they were very receptive to it. That being said, the Marley name didn't become what the Marley name is if they weren't extremely cautious and diligent and, did all of that background work. So a lot of time was also spent meeting the family and getting to know them. And, I'm very fortunate, and I feel we're very lucky because Mrs. Marley in particular, she was very involved in the different iterations of the product, and from some of the key points of differentiation with our functional mushrooms, she's played a very active role in, like our flavoring, even our mixing of different active ingredients. That's one of the things that we did with our mushrooms, is we said, look, nobody knows what functional mushrooms are, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is when you tell someone, oh, it's lion's mane, they're like, oh, I know lion's mane. They don't know, they've not used it, but they kind of think it's been around. So then how do you actually get them to try something that they think they've known, but they have never tried? And so we looked at him and said, how do we make our products even more effective? At the same time, bridge that gap of curiosity that they'd be more inclined to try them. And so, when we formulated the Marley One line, we looked at other actives. So we've put in there ginkgo, echinacea, L-theanine, other things that people are now familiar with and say, I take that. So that would be a bridge to them understanding how the mushroom would help them and support them. And then we flavored them. And some of those actives, as well as the flavors, Mrs. Marley was very instrumental in saying, I like this, it needs more of that, I don't like that. So that was also important to us, because at a series of different levels, what we found is this is a real relationship, like we're really collaboratively trying to build this into the best product and get this out to the world. And that's how our relationship has evolved. That's where it sits. And we feel very, very comfortable about the fact that we're on the right path. We're taking things that, our product is manufactured in the US. I'm not going to hide from that fact, because how do you scale it? You have to scale it in an environment that has all the pieces in place to do that. And that's what we're doing. But it's still very authentically Caribbean. It's still very much Bob Marley. And one of the things for me growing up is, I always associated One Love with this idea that we're all one. We're all one. Black, white, green, yellow, man, woman, child, whatever. We're all one. But what you see with psychedelics, what you understand with mushrooms, and what you feel with the energy of what we're doing is that oneness is not just one of people. That's one with the planet. That's one with the earth. And then when we get to understand how mushrooms grow and how their whole ecosystem exists, it reinforces that. So I say all that to say that all the touch points of relationship with the Marleys are not only real, but they're also in line with the spirit of what Bob Marley has come to represent. And one of the things I found so powerful the other day is, someone said to me, wow, I went to a conference in Vegas, and this guy is from the middle America, as middle America as you come. And he said, wow, Bob Marley. He said, there's no one who doesn't like Bob Marley. You'll never hear anybody say anything bad about Bob Marley. And I was like, that's really fascinating, but it's true. But, as I said, we take those great things that he's come to represent through his actions, through his words, through his intentions, and they're so much more, they're more relevant today than they were when he was alive, in my opinion.
His spirit lives on, huh?
Yeah, and another thing is Bob Marley's music reaches every corner of the world, every corner of the globe. We was in Bali and in a little shack and it's playing Bob Marley. We're in India and there's a little shack and it's playing Bob Marley, yeah. And it's the bridge that bridges the gap between, and it's interesting that it's still doing such good work. Yeah, fascinating. To pick up on a couple of points that you mentioned, when I was in my ayahuasca phase and when we was working with the plant medicine, one of the things that kept coming up was, if you do 50%, the plant will do the other 50% of the work. And I think this is what you were saying about the serendipities and the synchronicities of like meeting people and chance kind of standing next to somebody having a coffee who just happens to be the person you need to speak to. You'd never be able to get on the phone. And it does definitely feel that there's this collaboration point coming, not just with all these industries, but with all the plants. And something I said earlier, and I think it is very relevant, is cannabis has been slandered as the gateway for a long time, and it's almost like she's flipping it on her head, and it's the gateway to all this good stuff. And I think the mushrooms and the psychedelics, like looking in Denver where cannabis was legalised and then mushrooms followed, I think that they are getting grouped together and they're getting spoken about in similar places. Like we've had a lot of psychedelic talks, and then Breaking Conventions, which is the other big one in the UK, had a whole cannabis sector. So how do you see this kind of unfolding in the future? Because obviously you're the kind of forefronters of this integrating, but how are you seeing this in America and other places where these industries are trying to piggyback on each other, partnering up the mushrooms and the cannabis next door?
It's very interesting, and I see it more as, sort of previously taboo industries that are now becoming more mainstream or better accepted. And I think that's the extent of the sort of walking together of cannabis and psychedelics, to be very honest. I mean, I've been in both spaces, I operate in both spaces, and they're very different. Cannabis has, through CBD and THC together and separate, it has a lot of very powerful health benefits, absolutely. And functional mushrooms have a lot of health benefits. But when you talk about psychedelics and the transformative nature of psychedelics, the ability to take folks who have struggled with depression or thoughts of less than or anxiety or other more clinically assessed conditions, mental health conditions, and the fact that we can help them to have fulfilling lives, we can help them to move past what has inhibited them from being their full versions of themselves. I mean, it's so powerfully transformative that it's a completely separate segment to me than sort of cannabis or functional mushrooms, right? So I personally separate them in that way, but we are, all of us who are leading this charge, so to speak, we're dealing with that journey that goes from previously taboo to now acceptable. The part of it that's a little bit unfortunate is, it's gone from taboo to sort of big corporate, like in one leap step, you know what I mean? So it's almost as though, big corporates moving in, and I'm, they're peers of mine who I don't even know if they've even tried psychedelics, and yet they're out there raising tons of money doing it, and I'm not judging them for it. I'm simply saying that when you actually go through the process, when you understand the power of psychedelics and the ability to sort of become more of who you are, it's so powerful that there's a part of it that you can say, yes, I want to do this to improve my business, but I actually really want to do this to help people. And that's where we sit, that's how we look at it. So there's obviously similarities and parallels, but I think that's a big point of departure, that no matter what we do in the psychedelic space, we can't lose sight of having that ability to impact so many people positively now, with the history and the knowledge that we have from what the indigenous cultures have shown us. We can't allow the quote unquote normal paths of modern medicine to inhibit that too much. We have to respect that these things are in place for the benefit of all of us. But those are still the pathways that made opioids legal and a whole slew of other pharmaceuticals that have a whole slew of other challenges. So it's not to say that this is the right way. And what we look at from our company is the fact that we actually sit in a place where we can take indigenous and we can take modern science, and we have a bridge that we can hopefully better understand that, this way is not the only way, and this way is not the only way, but we can learn from both sides and maybe find another way forward to get this medicine into the hands of more people in a shorter amount of time.
Wonderful. You speak about big corporations coming in and and getting involved. That is happening. We can see that, and you say half of them haven't actually had any psychedelic experience. So maybe any big corporation that actually wants to come into any of these industries, the big CEOs have to actually do a shitload of psilocybin before they actually come and get involved.
Come to our retreat.
Exactly, we'll send them to your retreat. Exactly. Obviously, it's psilocybin in these psychedelic wellness retreats. You've got a functional mushroom brand that you've got to test in tomorrow, hopefully. I mean, I've tried some yesterday, and it tastes wonderful. It made me feel calm. Is the aim to have these products on the shelves, and eventually when this flips, you change the ingredients and all of a sudden you've got a fantastic psychedelic tincture on the shelf?
Well, this is going to help everyone to learn Marley One, right? With a product that's very, very safe, great efficacy and so forth. One doesn't replace the other one. Like Marley One will continue in a functional mushroom format. We will also add psychedelic products when that's legal in the various jurisdictions. So we're working right now we have in R&D some product formats in Jamaica where it's legal to have psychedelics. We're also looking in the Netherlands at some opportunities there. And then as these things roll out, depending on what the local legal landscape looks like, we'll add the appropriate products in those markets. But it's not to replace. It's to enhance, because the truth is what you get from using functional mushrooms is very different than what you get from using a psychedelic or psilocybin-based product.
I'm going to, huh? Yeah, we can open it up to questions. I just wanted to add a little bit about some of the Colombian teachings and some of the indigenous, the ayahuasca stuff. And what's happened with a lot of the ayahuasca stuff in Peru is it's created this ayahuasca tourism that's been really detrimental to the plant and to the... So basically, to cut a long story short, there's this plant, ayahuasca, the vine, and really to have a good brew, you need a 12-year-old vine. So these vines are becoming more and more desirable, and there's a tourist trade for the vine, and therefore it's becoming more farmed, and there's illegal farmers, and they're going further into the jungle. And I think one of the things that we just need to be mindful of, even though there's many benefits, we need to be just thoughtful of how that impacts when we start to get a huge demand on things. And I think if we are going to, a lot of the psychedelic stuff that I've done is it starts with intention. I'm sure you're completely on the same path. And I think if we're coming from this, what concerns me, and one of the reasons why I created the magazine, was to kind of stop the prostitution of these sacred plants, because these plants historically misused and mistreated in the same way tobacco and, well, all of them, look at opium, look at all the plants that are coca leaf, and it's definitely happened with ayahuasca. It happened with the mushroom and the shamanic Rita, the woman with the mushroom tribe. And what I'm hoping we can do with this indigenous wisdom is we can learn from our mistakes, and we can talk about our failings as well as our successes to try and learn as much as we can, so we don't create a need that then causes a down the road issue with sustainability, or people not being held, or people kind of doing it at home because they don't want to go through official channels. And another thing that's really important with the psychedelic stuff is the environment and the holding and the intention and the aftercare and the sharing and the power of the group. For example, we went on a retreat. We've done a couple of ayahuasca retreats, and we had one in India, and it was amazing. It was beautiful. It was on the beach, but because the group kind of we weren't contained. So some people were going off shopping, and some people were going to the beach, and we were eating at a buffet, and we weren't all sitting together. It's not just the medicine that's important, it's also that camaraderie and the setting and the group. And one of the things that we learned really quickly in ayahuasca ceremonies is everybody in the circle is a mirror for your teaching, and you start to see people, and not only people that you get on with, people that really annoy you are also one of the part of your lessons. So where do you stand with the kind of the setting the scene and the space? And something I took away from Colombia again is, like, because we haven't got all the tools in place, we can't do it in the traditional manner. It's kind of respectful winging it, or like mashing it up and using what we've got to create the same sort of environment, but in a kind of ghetto twist. How do you kind of deal with the setting the environment and setting the space and intention and kind of mindfulness of the whole process?
Sure. Well, I mean, first it's who leads the retreats. And I think, as we grow out this industry, it's very important that we have a high bar for people who are not sort of self-declared shamans and they want to take people on a retreat and they don't know how to do it, but really making sure that, that person is properly qualified. And that will do a lot to sort of, in the beginning stages, manage the demand with the supply. Because while there may be more demand than supply, the important thing is that people have a proper experience and not just an experience, because that has some potential detrimental effects both on understanding how the experience works for you, as well as even the industry as it grows out. But for us, I mean, I should have touched on this earlier, but setting and integration those are the three key variables in the process. And I mentioned before about the screening. I mentioned a little bit about how we onboard, but through the course of the retreat, that's where the one-on-ones come in, just to check in with everyone. How are you doing? Are you on your path? And in that way, they can modify whether they give them a little bit more, a little bit less, so that they really have that very fulsome experience coming out of it. But we choose environments to control for some of the variables you just mentioned. We don't go to hotels where you're with other hotel guests, because again, you have this beautiful ceremony or this beautiful interaction, then all of a sudden it's like, let's go to Dunn's River Falls, or let's go over here and do this and do that, and it starts to peel away at that little sort of outside of your normal world that you're now going to occupy, and that's what allows this thing to be so magnificent and amplify your own growth. So we look for villas that we have completely self-contained. We take folks into natural settings. You know, Jamaica's beautiful, as you can appreciate. So there's a lot of different environments that we can take our group to enhance that whole experience they're already going through, and that's very important to us. But yeah, I mean, like the meals, the communion, you know, the group size is also very important. You know, we will not go past 12 people in a group, because what we found is that that's where the different energies start to get a little bit, it's harder to manage. You know, you're always going to have a couple outliers who are a little bit more challenging than the rest, and you want to manage that group dynamic so that really and truly you can have the greatest chance of giving everyone that very positive experience. But as I say, I mean, we have one-on-ones that we do with people, so we'll have like individual retreats for those people who don't want to be in a group setting. You know, their fears or their concerns are such that they want that one-on-one connection. They don't want to be sharing in an environment, even with strangers, that they don't feel comfortable. And that's important, because coming into it, a huge part of it is getting them aware of what they're going to experience, so you have that comfort. You know, the idea of a bad trip, and I use quotation marks, isn't usually because your fears, your anxieties are preventing you from being 100% present in the experience. And so we try to take that off the table as much as we possibly can to facilitate that experience for our customers. Yeah.
I think you touched on it there, where the experience and the bad trip of that fear and anxiety. I was actually hosting a panel earlier on psychedelics in the seminar zone, and there was an army war veteran that takes war veterans over to Peru to take ayahuasca, and you got to get your dose right, because if you he was actually saying you need to take a very heavy, large dose, because that gets rid of any of your battle coming from you as a human being. That all of that responsibility is completely taken away from you. So, you know, interesting to know what sort of dosages that you're giving in these retreats. If anybody hasn't seen these retreats, by the way, make sure you check out the Silo Wellness website. There is a video on there that I actually showed to some of my friends a few days ago, and boy, does it make you want to go there. But what sort of dosages are you giving at these retreats? Do you have is there certain amounts, or is it different for everybody?
It differs for everyone. It's ranged from, that I'm aware of, everything from 2 grams to 8 grams, depending on the individual, depending on the species, so it varies, but it really comes down to a real investment in ensuring that each individual person within the group is truly getting the greatest probability of having that revelation that they're in search of. And yeah, so I mean that it just ranges really, and then it modifies. So we typically give, in a 4 to 5 day retreat, there'll be 3 different medicine sessions, 3 different ceremonies as we call them, and so it'll move. Like again, after that first one, he sits them down, typically one-on-one, talks to them, goes through that whole experience that they had, and then he'll make the adjustments into their second and their third sessions, whether it's more, whether it's less, whether it's a higher dosage in the second to watch and then to come down or to go back up.
Yeah,
sure.
We're going to open it up to the floor, and is there any questions in the audience? Anybody want to take advantage of this wisdom? Come on, guys. Oh. Do you want to come over, babes? Come and get the mic. Come on. Hey.
So, my question was, what sort of form is it? Is it all synthetic psilocybin that you're making people? Is it literally just the actual mushrooms? It's not the synthetic version?
It's not synthetic, no. And we put it in he puts it into a, basically like a shake.
Okay.
So what that does is it tends to, it circumvents, it avoids the digestive process. So you don't have upset stomach and that sort of thing. It tends to be a little bit smoother for our customers. But all natural, the shake.
Over there.
Oh, you're floating.
Hi, I was just really interested in what you just said about avoiding gastrointestinal distress, because I think that's quite common. So you said you put it in a shake. Could you talk a little bit more about that? Is it the fact that you blend it or what you combine it with that you think eliminates that? Because that's, it is a big issue for a lot of participants.
Thanks, Shanna.
So that's part of our secret sauce that we only reveal when you come on a retreat. So I'll give you some date now. I'm trying to remember what he puts in it. Jess, do you remember what First Man puts in it? He puts ginger. There's some sugar cane he puts in there as well. But basically that just, converts the psilocybin to psilocin, and therefore it's a conversion of psilocybin to psilocin that typically is where it causes the discomfort. So once it's given to you like that, it's a lot smoother.
Just to randomly add an extra point, how I found ayahuasca was I listened to a talk about it. And I just really wanted to find it. And I put it out into the universe, into the energy field, whatever you want to call it. And all of a sudden, it's like, it took a while. It's almost like manifesting. It's like The Secret. It's like you have to think about it and forget it. But definitely, there is something that's wordless, where the magic of the plant comes to you. And if you put it out into the field, if people want to do it and you don't know what it is and you don't want to go on a clinical trial, maybe you'll bump into somebody tonight with a big pot of mushrooms. Or I do definitely feel there is an interaction where the plant kingdom is part of us and we're part of it. And if we put it out there that it wants to find us, it will find us. It's almost like finding a relationship, because it is a relationship. And the other thing to mention is the shamanic training that I learn about is once you want to actually commit to the path of the medicine, is you then do a diet. You do dieta, and when you do dieta, you consume the plant from 5 days up to 2 years, depending on what plant it is and how strict you are with it. But the idea is that you cultivate that plant inside of yourself so that you then can have this relationship with the plant, and you can work with it as a teacher plant going forward. And I think it's just a really interesting thing to ponder, that all of us have been consuming cannabis for so long, and we kind of come up with these ideas, or was the ideas in the field? And because we've been consuming it so long, we've picked up the job from the energy field, and we've all started doing little parts of the job. And that's definitely how I feel about my cannabis journey. Is it's almost like it's destined, this is this destined relationship that's kind of always been there. So I'm so glad that you guys are doing such amazing work, and kind of, it's one to watch, isn't it? Let's see what you're doing in 3, 5, 10 years. I think you're going to change a lot of people's lives. So thank you so much. Thank you. Have a round of applause. And thank you for coming so far for us as well.
Just Vix, very quickly. Douglas, do you want to just let us know where you can find out any more information on Silo and Marley One?
Sure. You can visit our website, silowellness.com. And we also have a website for Marley One, which is marleyone.com.
And also, you're in the expo tomorrow.
Oh yeah, we're in the expo as well. Product Earth. Loco Soco.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much. Have a fantastic evening. And thank you very much, Douglas, for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers, buddy.